لا راوجي ام جاردا میوانداری دکین ل برز جانت بیل جانت بیل نوسرچی امریکاییه که بسالان لنزیک وکو هاوجینی نمر موری بوچکین به یکو جاون ولی سرکارکانی زور شتینوسی و زور کاری کردو دیار الپیج اوی که دیار دست به پرسیارکان ممکن امن دم برزیان بناسینم. Before I ask your my questions, I would like to read out some information about yourself in Kurdish, if you permit me. جانت بیل وکو باسم کرد نوسرکی سیاسیه که بتایبتیج لسر مسئله شارداریتی آزادانه و هر وها اکولوژی کمالاتی کاری کردو دیاره او گشت او ایدئولو او فکرانه که للاین مورای بوکچین و کاری بکراوه و او هر وها کسی که رخنه لفمینیزمی اکولوژیستی دگره لسالی 1986 او لانستیتوی سوسیال اکولوژی دا دستی بکار بخوندن کرد و لوه دستی کرد به هاوکاری بین هتایی لگل بوکچین و بچوی چی بردوام و چروپر کاری کرد لگلی نماوی 20 سالی دواتر لودا و بتایبتی بو مسئله شیکردنەوە و باسکردنی ئێکۆلۆجی کۆمەڵایەتی و لە ماڵی خۆیان ڕا لە بەرلینگتن لە ڤێرمۆنت لە دەوڵەتە یەکگرتوەکانی ئەمریکا لە ساڵی 1970 تا ساڵی 2000 ئەو بوکچین بەیەکەوە چەند کتێبی دراستیدا بڵێن ڕۆژنامەیەکیان بڵاو دەکردەوە بە نێوی گرین پەرسپێکتیڤز یعنی ڕوانگەکانی کەسک کە دوایە ئەوە ناوەکەی گۆڕا بوو بە لێفت گرین پەرسپێکتیڤز و هەروەها ئەو دەڕاستیدا ئەو ڕیدەر یعنی یەکێک لە گرنگترین کتێبەکانی لەسەر بوکچین ئێدیت کردووە کە بڵێن هەروەها سەرەتای بۆ نووسیوە بە ناوی سۆشیال ئێکۆلۆجی و لیبرتاریان مونیسیپالیزم یعنی شارەدارەتی ئازادانە کە لە ساڵی 1998 بڵاو بووتەوە و هەروەها فکرکردنەوەی دووبارە لە سیاسەتەکانی ئێکۆفێمینیستی و سەبارەت بە ئێکۆفێمینیزمیش ئەو دەرسانەی کە لە تەجروبەی ئەڵمان تجربه ئەڵمان دەکرێت بگرێ ئەو هەروەها نووسەری ژمارەیەکی زۆر لە مقالە و بڵێن وتارە لە پەیوەندی لەگەڵ بیر و باوەڕەکانی بوکچیندا بە تایبەتی سەبارەت بە شارەداریتی ئازادانە و هەروەها ئێکۆلۆژی کۆمەڵایەتی و هەروەها ئێکۆفێمینیزم و بوکچین دەڕاستیدا بۆ خۆی ئەو سەرەتایەی کە ئەو بۆ ڕیدەرەکەی نووسیوە بە باشترین سەرەتایەک دەزانێت بۆ کارەکانی. بیل هەروەها پشتیوانێکی مافی بزوتنەوەی کوردیشە لە تورکیا و بە تایبەتی لەگەڵ ئیدەکانی بەڕێز عەبدوڵڵا ئۆجەڵان ئاشنایەتی پەیدا کردووە و ئێستا یەکێکە کە وەک دەزانن لە بەڕێز ئۆجەڵان لە زینداندا ئیمکانی وەی هەبوو کە بەشێک لە نووسینەکانی بوکچین بخوێنێتەوە و دیارە دەزانین کە لە ساڵی 1992 لە زیندانە و دیارە پێی خۆش بوو کە لە پەیوەندی بکەونە دەگەڵ بوکچین کە دیارە لە بەرنامەکەدا لەسەر و مەسەلەیە لەگەڵ بەڕێزیان زیاتر قسە دەکەین بۆ لە دوای ساڵی 2006 یعنی لە دوای وەفاتی بوکچین بەڕێز جانت بیل پەیوەندی پەیدا کردووە دەگەڵ چالاکی و هەروەها پشتیوانیکردن لە مەسئلەی کورد و لەو دەمیەوە لە ساڵی 2011 کتێبی ئەتۆنۆمی دموکراتیکی لە باکووری کوردستان لە زمانی ئەڵمانیەوە تەرجمە کردو بە زمانی ئینگلیزی و لە ساڵی 2011 بەو لایەوە ئیدی ئەو حاڵ خۆی وەکو لە مەسەلەی ئێکۆلۆژی کۆمەڵایەتی بە دوور دەگرێت تا ڕادەیەک و خۆی وەکو کەسێکی سۆسیال دموکرات دەناسێنێ. بەڕێز بیل هەروەها یەکێکە لە ئەندامانی دەستەی نێونەتەواتی بۆ بەرگریکردن لە بەڕێز عەبدوڵڵا ئۆجەڵان کە دیار لەو بەرنامەیەدا قسەی لەسەر دەکەین لە بەشی یەکەمی بەرنامەکەماندا زیاتر لەسەر بوکچین ڕادەوەستین. Thank you very much for your patience and for your coming to the program. First of all, I would like to know that how did you come into contact with BOOKCHIN?
Thank you very much for inviting me onto your show, Hassan. I came into contact with BOOKCHIN in 1986 when I was living in New York City, and I attended a school where he was teaching a session in the summertime in Vermont, which is a state north of New York City. It's almost to Canada. He had a school there where he was teaching an ideology called social ecology. And I actually had a friend who was also teaching there. I attended for the 2-week session and found that I liked these ideas very much.
Okay, before that you were not interested in politics, or
No, I was interested in green politics before.
In green politics, but I think you have also been studying theater somehow.
Yes, I was studying theater before, and I studied art before, and I work as a book editor. I edit books for publishers in New York. I still do.
So during this course of study, so you become interested in his ideas.
Well, he was an anarchist. He was known as an anarchist, and actually, to tell you the truth, that wasn't what I was interested in. I was interested in a new ecological politics that he was talking about, in which people could empower each other on a face-to-face level, with or without the state. He was talking about the need for an anti-capitalist green movement, one that was radical, one that opposed the nation-state, because these things were causes of the ecological crisis.
Now we are talking about 1980s, yes?
Yes, in the late 1980s, yes. And it wasn't, and not simply that, but he also had a whole philosophy that went with that, and a political movement that he was trying to form as well. So I love that combination. So when he invited me to come up to Burlington, Vermont to work with him, I said yes. So I decided to study with him philosophy and politics in his living room where he was teaching. He was a retired teacher. And in the same room, on other nights of the week, we had a political group, the Burlington Greens, where we worked to create an ecological politics in Burlington, Vermont. Yeah,
I think in the introduction for the reader, you I think refer to him somewhere, that he says that people are ends in their own right, not means for one another use. Can you please explain that?
Well, he was opposed to the instrumentalization of people, if that's not too big a word. He thought that the under the current system, people were stripped of their ability to function politically. They only go to the polls to vote.
You mean in capitalism?
Under capitalism, they go to polls to vote for the representatives once every few years, and then they're supposed to sit back like sheep and let the representatives that they elect make all the decisions for them. And he thought this was very bad. He also thought that capitalism was eliminating the concept of citizenship and turning people into consumers, individual consumers of goods produced for the benefit of the capitalist system. And he wanted to revive the concept of citizenship. He thought that could only be done at the local level, in a decentralized political system that was based not on individual greed and consumption, but on community, on rebuilding community in the United States, which is a very difficult thing because we are a country that very much advocates individualism and selfishness, yes? But he thought that would be the only way to create an ecological politics, because the power to make decisions about things that affected the natural world needed to be made by the people, so rather than by the corporations, rather than by the masters of industry, so that they would be, because people would naturally be more concerned with preserving their environment rather than being exploited by it, rather than being exploited by capitalism to harm their environment.
And from the same, introduction, there's a reference also that says that people could manage their own affairs without benefits of a state.
Yes.
So by that you mean that in Bookchin's views, the state didn't have the same function in the contemporary world, or what?
No, he thought that, as I said, he thought the state only was a source of domination of people and stripped them of their active ability to participate in politics. He thought that he wanted to create citizens' assemblies modeled on some earlier examples in history, where people had gotten together in assemblies and addressed the issues and voted on them through democratic decision making after discussing them. In past examples, of history, like in ancient Greece, women were excluded, people who were not Athenians were excluded, but of course in a modern version of these institutions, women would be included. There would be no slavery, of course, as there was in Athens. There would be people of different ethnicities and different minorities would all be included as citizens. He regarded the citizen not as an exclusionary concept, but as a concept by which all the transcended differences, by which people of all different genders and ethnicities and religions could participate equally as citizens in decision-making.
But this empowerment, is it possible while the state still exists? For instance, if you look at the world order now, we have still so-called nation states. How was his ideas about the nation states?
Well, of course, in one little citizens' assembly in a neighborhood or town, is not going to be able to fight the nation state by itself.
Yeah.
So he wanted the different citizens' assemblies in urban neighborhoods and in towns and villages to form confederations over broader areas, especially over ecological regions, so that they could make decisions over the broad areas, right, that affected everybody at that level. And as more and more people came to participate in the citizens' assemblies, it would strengthen these confederations so that the confederation would become, in effect, a dual power to the nation state. It would be a popular power, and that the nation state and capitalism would be hollowed out because people would be so glad to be able to participate and make and govern themselves rather than have other people govern for.
And the contradictions between the contradiction between the two, how it could be solved? Was it through violence or just through the dialogue, or how?
We hope not through violence. Yeah. Right. We thought BOOKCHIN hoped that it would, on a molecular level, people as individuals would come over to the side of the
Could
Confederation.
You please speak a little slowly, because
cross over to support the Confederation. Yeah. And also very important that the military, the rank and file soldiers, come over to support the Confederation, because that's been the case in revolutions past. For example, the Russian Revolution in February, where the military came over to support the other side of the revolutionaries. We hope that it could happen peacefully that way, that the old institutions would be hollowed out in favor of the new. But if not, then there could potentially be an armed conflict.
Then can you let me know a little about his background and his activities while he was in his youth? I think he was a very radical let's say, struggler inside the workers' movement.
Yes, he was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, who born in 1921, and so you can see from that date that when he was a teenager, he was in New York in the most radical period of the communist movement, the Marxist-Leninist movement. This is during the Great Depression.
In 1930s?
1930s, when capitalism seemed like it was about to collapse because of so many different problems, and the Marxist-Leninist movement under which he later called Stalinism, was very strong. So he was a young man. He was 14 in the most radical period of the communist movement. So he was a committed revolutionary. It was only later, after in the 1940s, he tried to organize the proletariat to make a revolution along Marxist lines. But he realized that the proletariat was not revolutionary. That they're militant, very strong about fighting for better working conditions and better hours, but they were not trying to make a revolution to overthrow capitalism the way Marx had predicted. And without a revolutionary proletariat, he believed, Marxism had no use as a political strategy. And so he abandoned Marxism. But unlike many of his comrades in that generation who went over to embrace the existing system, he refused to do that. He wanted to rethink the socialist project, the project of making a social revolution, but to discern what could be the limits of capitalism. What were the limits? Because he considered it an evil system. And if the limit were not such as Karl Marx had predicted, then what were the limits? So in the 1950s, he joined a group of people who had the same commitment to continuing the project of social revolution that he did, and they examined every single issue that came into their awareness in the news to see, is this the limits of capitalism? Could this be it?
Yeah, and when you are coming now to 1950s, so what was his experience during the witch hunt during McCartney's era in 1950s?
None. He had left the communist movement by then. He left in the late he left the movement under Stalin in 1938, 39, and he stopped being a Trotskyist in 1946 or so. So he was no longer a Marxist of any kind by the time the McCarthyist witch hunts. The group that he was in were all ex-Trotskyists and also some Zionists, and they were looking at these issues not from a Marxist perspective, so his group wasn't persecuted by
And you mean they were tolerated by the state, or what?
They ignored them. They ignored them. They were going after bigger fish who were actually communists, like big people in Hollywood and in the government.
Yeah, and then if you are just tell me a little about these ideas that developed into books, and if you can refer to the books, some of the books at that period and later.
Well, he wrote, when I said that he was looking for the different issues that could be the limits of capitalism, he thought that the most important one at the time was ecology. He thought that agriculture, for example, farming, had changed from small farms to giant industrial farms filled with chemicals, where foods were filled with chemicals and pesticides, and food was produced far from where people live in cities, that cities themselves were becoming too big. He thought that both needed to be rescaled, brought down to a smaller size, that farms needed to go back to being small and intimate with farmers rather than laborers. He wanted crops to be rotated, not to be monocultures, but to be diversified, and so that way we can get rid of the chemicals, and people would consume the food near where it was produced. So that meant cities also had to be decentralized, broken up into smaller units to create a marriage of town and country in what he called eco-communities. The cities too were very harmful to human health because the cities were emitting pollution, air pollution, water pollution was very bad in those years. And so he thought that the limits of capitalism had to be human health, that we would not tolerate all these chemicals in our bodies and all the pollution in the air and the water. And from that, he deduced the need to decentralize society and to decentralize the economy and to decentralize especially the political system into these kinds of, because the governing unit for these small eco-communities would be the citizens' assembly.
And I think he called these decentralized communities or decentralized, let's say, society as a logical society, yes?
A rational society.
Rational, yes.
But rational in a very specific sense. Rational that's in an ethical sense, not in an instrumental sense. So
if you refer to the books, some of the books, I mean by name,
of course, yes. One of the most important is the Ecology of Freedom, in which he traces the history of the rise of hierarchy.
Ecology of Freedom.
Ecology of Freedom. Which is anthropological and historical and philosophical. He traces the rise of hierarchy from the domination of the young by the old, the domination of women by men, the domination of different races by each other, the domination by religious priests, domination by warriors, to domination by the state and by capitalism. So he traces this whole evolution.
And this is
in order to try to destroy this system.
When it came out,
you have to analyze it before you understand it.
When it came out?
Before you overthrow it. That book came out in 1982.
And then?
And then the second most important book is called The Rise of Urbanization, or also Urbanization Without Cities. It has several titles.
I think it has been translated into Turkish.
As Urbanization Without Cities, yes. And this is a story of this, remember I mentioned confederations as forming a counterpower to the nation state that could potentially overthrow it? In this book, Urbanization Without Cities, he explored these citizens' assemblies and confederations in history, and he thought that the hold of the nation state of the state on a nation or on people was actually very fragile, potentially, and that in Europe, for example, for a long time people had lived under confederations and there was a lot of tension between the city and the state, and that they were intrinsically opposed to each other.
And the other books?
Other books, The Philosophy of Social Ecology, which has also been translated into Turkish. It's an exploration of his dialectical, what he called dialectical naturalism. It's a philosophy to underpin all this. Toward an Ecological Society is another book that's been published in Turkish. It's a translation of various essays from the 1980s. And the other one, finally there's a book in Turkish that's been translated called Remaking Society, which is a very brief, easy summary of all these complicated ideas, the philosophy, the politics, the history, in one easy book called Remaking Society, published in 1991 and also translated into Turkish.
Yeah, and then the latest, what was his latest work?
The last work to be published is called The Third Revolution, which explored the history of popular movements in European and American revolutions. The first revolution was the revolution of the bourgeoisie against the feudal system. The second revolution is the revolution of the authoritarians like Marxists against the bourgeoisie. And the third revolution is the revolution of the people against the authoritarian revolutionaries like the Marxists.
And I think before his passing away in 2006, was he not active before, or how long he was active in his life?
He had been active advocating these ideas for decades, for his entire adult life. And the story of his life, which I've described in his biography recently, is a story of trying to persuade the American left in all these different decades to adopt these ideas. And in the end, as you can see, America still exists. It's still capitalist. There's still a nation state, and people didn't understand the importance of the ecological crisis. So he did not have success in making the revolution that he worked all his adult life. Yeah.
And then, what was your own contribution to his ideas?
Well, I met him in 1987, as I said, and I came up to Burlington and worked with him. And my contribution was to defend his ideas. He got involved in many controversies. He was there are other tendencies in the ecology movement. For example, there was a tendency called deep ecology that regarded human beings as intrinsically bad, intrinsically evil, bad for nature. And BOOKCHIN with social ecology said, no, people are not the cause of the problem. It's our social arrangements.
Yes, which is the cause.
Capitalism and the state. And because humans created those arrangements, they can change them. And so that gives us hope, right? Yeah. So I helped in these controversies. I defended his ideas. I wrote critiques. And then in the late 1990s, you see, he had written this big book, Urbanization Without Cities, and some little articles about libertarian municipalism, but we needed a primer, an introductory book for libertarian municipalism. So he asked me to write that, and so that's what I did. It's called, in English, The Politics of Social Ecology, Libertarian Municipalism. It's recently been published in Turkish by a press in Istanbul. Yeah. So.
And then let me know, for instance, you have been living with him for almost 20 years.
19 years, yes.
Yes, 90 years. Do you have any quarrels from time to time or not?
Yeah, sometimes sometimes we disagreed about the nation state. Yeah. Because I came to the conclusion, I saw too that no progress was being made, that the ecological crisis was becoming more and more severe, and that this movement, bottom-up movement that he wanted, was not taking place. And so I thought that it's necessary to have both, to go into the political system and have people working inside the system at the same time as there's a movement from outside, so that we have pressure for both to change. Yeah. But he disagreed. He was complete anti-state, completely against the state.
Yeah. So. I think I didn't see any reference specifically to the question of language in his works. What he thought about the languages and the role of language, or the concept of language.
I'm sorry. We were in the United States. He did not think deeply about this concept because it was not an issue in his milieu. I'm sorry. I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah. And then the contact with the Kurdish issue. I mean, when it started, because as you know, the Kurdish issue has been a very long issue for the past 100 years at least, in the all different places in the Middle East, which has not been solved yet. But practically, as we also said in the introduction, so both you and him will come contact or to know about the Kurdish movement in the north of Kurdistan in Turkey. Can you say a little bit about it?
Okay. Well, first I need to say that during the Iraq War, he was very sympathetic to the Kurds and to the Saddam Hussein's destruction of the Kurds in Iraq, his attacks on the Kurds. But the actual initial contact came in April of 2004, when an email came from a couple of Germans who were Kurdish solidarity activists.
Yeah.
Who were asking for a dialogue between BOOKCHIN and their comrade, their Sterk,
yeah.
Öcalan,
yeah.
in prison. And we were very surprised. We were very astonished to
get some such a message.
Because we thought of Mr. Öcalan as a Marxist-Leninist,
yeah.
the way BOOKCHIN had been, and did not really understand the request. But BOOKCHIN wrote back saying, here are some books of mine that have been translated into Turkish. Why don't you read them? It turns out Apo had already read them.
Yeah.
So a month later, the intermediaries wrote back. They had given BOOKCHIN's response to Öcalan on Imrali via the lawyers.
Yes.
So the intermediaries wrote back saying that he would like to have a dialogue, and that he had read BOOKCHIN's books. He considered himself a very good student of BOOKCHIN's work. He considered himself a social ecologist, which is the name for BOOKCHIN's ideas, and that his goal was to create the first society on earth built on these ideas. And Murray wrote back saying, this is wonderful. I'm too tired and sick to have a dialogue, but I'm very glad to hear that you have this goal, and I'm sure the Kurdish movement is in good hands with such a talented leader.
Yeah.
So,
And then later you have yourself joined these international delegation for asking for the release of Öcalan, and then I think you were there in 2006.
Yes, I was.
Recently, I think, because I also interviewed one of the other members of the delegation, Dr. Eli.
Yes, that was a few months ago. I've been involved with the Kurdish movement for several years before then.
Yes, but we just taking part in this delegation and visiting Turkey.
Yes,
how was it there? Yes.
It was an international delegation, and we were trying to get, as Eli, I'm sure, explained to you, the ministry, the Turkish ministry, to permit us to visit Imrali Island. But we were not permitted. Not even his lawyers had been permitted to see him. Not as his lawyers hadn't been permitted for 4 years. So our request was not granted. But in the meantime, we talked to various Kurdish political people, to HDP members, to HDK members, and we spoke to lawyers, and they were able to give us a lot of good information, and we came back and tried to write about it in the media in the West and be interviewed and publicize the persecution, the destruction of the Kurdish cities of the southeast in Bakur by the Turkish state, notably Cizre and all the others that your viewers know very well about. So.
Okay, thank you very much for this time, because I think we have lots of things to speak about.
Okay.
So we continue in in our second part of our program. So thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. بینرانی خوشویست لردا دگین کوتاهی ام بشه برنامه کمان لبر اوی که برز بیل زور قصی هیا که دراستی دا بکلکه که بینران گویان لبه اما برنامه که دیکش دگل برز زیان دکین و باسی او سفرانه دکین که کردویتی بو روژ آوای کردستان تاکو راوجی که دیکه لای او ما خوش